410 miles from landfall, we're still in a path of destruction. I'm Dave Malkoff in Atlanta, Georgia. Look at what has happened here. These are power lines that have snapped as trees came down, blowing in the wind, rain pouring. It is not just this neighborhood. This is all of the big city of Atlanta throughout the state of Georgia. We'll have a report coming up.
And if you look at the sky right now, it's hard to believe that 20 hours ago, we had the eye wall of Hurricane Zeta cross right through New Orleans. It's been more than 30 years since the eye of a hurricane came across the city. But if you look around all the beautiful neighborhoods here, you definitely know we had something that came through here. You see trees down, power lines, power is out across this city. We'll talk about the long, slow cleanup of this area after yet a seventh landfall here in Louisiana. That's coming up with us Center Live.
And as New Orleans and other parts of the South deal with the direct hit from Zeta that has already been done, all the effects, other areas, including here in Richmond, Virginia, still dealing with what Zeta is bringing now. The system bringing some heavy rain, already triggering some flash flood warnings, and bringing a lot of wind that could bring more power outages like what we saw in the state of Georgia, with more than 1 million customers without power at one point. And this system now charging into the mid-Atlantic on a course that will take it just off the East Coast. What that could mean coming up. But that won't be the end of Zeta. In Boston, of course, you're one of the places that needs to be watching what's going to happen next, because this energy, well, it could help make things, that's right, wintry across parts of the Northeast. We're going to get into that in just a moment, but first get into what it is now. And what it is no longer tropical, but post-tropical. All that really is saying, it just doesn't have the characteristics that would check every box to say this is a tropical storm. Still a storm, still a lot of wind, a lot of rain, and the potential for some severe weather with this. Here it is in Virginia now. It is moving to the east-northeast at 53 miles an hour. And overall, these winds still around 50 miles an hour. And those are the winds associated with the overall system. Individual gusts expected to be stronger than that at times. High wind warnings in effect for central North Carolina, parts of Virginia, and parts of South Carolina. Here in Virginia, in the southern part of the Delmarva, in an area where severe weather, thunderstorms of the stronger variety may be happening during the day today, which means we may see more power outages happening. And the old power outage tracker here, you can see the path of the storm, roughly like that. So this action right here associated with Zeta, and then of course the power outages in California, and the power outages associated with the ice in Oklahoma and Texas. But what else I think is interesting, as they're coming down, as those power outages are coming down, now under 3 million across the United States, well over 500,000 of those in Georgia, which is right here. And then you have 1, 2, 3 states away is where the hurricane made landfall. So it's not just a function of the strength of the winds, it's what those winds are blowing. And in an area like Atlanta that was hit so hard by Zeta, there's a lot of trees around a lot of people. Early morning hours in the Atlanta area, the pre-dawn hours, with reports of hundreds of trees down. Some of the trees, unfortunately, slamming into homes. Others blocking roads. And our Dave Malkoff has a closer look at the situation there on the ground in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's amazing to think we are 410 miles from landfall in Louisiana, but the storm was able to keep its strength. Even tropical storm force winds here in Atlanta. Look what it did in this one neighborhood here, snapping those power lines like they were nothing. The trees just coming down, blowing in the wind, knocking out power to hundreds in this neighborhood. And this is just one example of dozens and dozens of neighborhoods that we have personally seen this morning as we have been driving around assessing the damage. In the road, covered in vines. It was the dead of night so there was no lights at all on this roadway. It was very slick with the water and also the leaves and the pine needles that were on the road. This gentleman was in his vehicle and slammed right into that tree. He believes he totaled his car. He is okay. His airbags didn't even go off, but he was very shooken up by this event. He didn't even see that tree in front of him. There have been a lot of these incidents happening. We even saw a tree into a house northwest of here. There was a tree into a trailer. There was a death in northern Georgia. So it's a path of destruction that started in the Gulf of Mexico, but pushed all the way through here because the storm was moving so fast that it was able to keep its strength as it pushed through state by state, causing destruction wherever it went. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel.
All right, Dave, thank you so much. And Atlanta in Georgia, and then to the place where the storm came ashore as a hurricane. And that's where meteorologist Paul Goodloe rode out Hurricane Zeta in New Orleans. Now, today, the sun is up, temperatures are down. And what are you noticing there in New Orleans, Paul?
Well, a lot of people are dealing with down power lines and power being out, and trees being down as well. Again, Zeta, it was the 5th landfall of any named system here in Louisiana just this year, the 7th landfall in the U.S. this season. So it's been very active. The forecast was active as well. But I tell you what, I think Zeta caught a lot of people by surprise with the destruction it did. We're always on edge in terms of flooding here in the New Orleans area because of the history with Katrina back in 2005. But it's been like 30 plus years since an eye of a hurricane came over New Orleans, and that streak. New Orleans resident and a local, and you live right down the street here. Emmanuel Jackson, your house across the street from this magnolia tree that came down. Talk about this, because you were dealing with what was going on with Zeta. Talk about what you heard and experienced last night when the eye wall winds came through here.
Well, when the wind started getting heavy, you started to feel it in the house. So being curious, I did the dangerous thing of going to my window and looked outside, and you can see the tree straight outside. My mind wasn't on the tree, but as soon as I noticed it, it was wobbling. And not 5-6 seconds after I looked at it, it came down, looked like slow motion. And the 3 vehicles that were parked there, the tree missed all 3 vehicles.
Wow. So we have a camera set up on your front porch looking across. So that tree was in front of a church there, but you're saying the tree coming down, breaking this power line, the power was out even before that tree came down.
Yeah, the power was out maybe about half hour before the tree even hit the power lines. It hit all the power lines around here, power, cable, and phone. So everything is out around here.
So did you make any preps earlier? Because this is not the first time New Orleans has been threatened this season with a tropical system.
Yeah, we always make the regular preps around here. It's nothing new. You know, we get a little, I guess, desensitized towards it, and we make the easy preps. You know, the water, the not necessarily a generator. Our generators are candles. You know, but most of us have gas around here, gas stoves, so we're able to eat, we're able to be comfortable, and luckily last night there was a cool breeze, so most people had their windows and back doors open, and we were comfortable.
So did anything surprise you with the force of Zeta last night?
Very. It was very surprising to hear the winds as they were and seeing that tree tumble. Ironically, there were 2 trees like that, 2 magnolia trees in front of the church like that, and ironically, the other one fell about 30 years ago.
So what do you do now?
We just wait. We're going to see how the church handles the tree situation because I don't think Entergy Power can do anything until that tree is gone. It was funny to see last night. I mean, the sky was gray, then it turned pink, then it was yellow, and now it's like this.
All right, well, Emmanuel Jackson, thank you for your time and best wishes of you to recovery, and hopefully we'll get the power back here as well. But it's basically, we sit and wait now, and it's just we're fortunate that we didn't see a bigger loss of life or more injuries here. So I guess that's the silver lining. But still, even the one life we did lose, it was because someone went out and happened to encounter a down power line that happened to be live. So 2 words of caution as we go forward is treat down power lines as they're live, and also treat out traffic signals as four-way stops. You know, we're constantly seeing near hits at these intersections here that, yeah, we all got stuff and places to go, but you got to remember the basics of driving here, a four-way stop when that signal is out. Chris?
And yes, that is some excellent points there, Paul. A reminder that you might be on a street that has light after light, and there's one that doesn't. And I saw that today. Cars were going through the one that that was out, right? That wasn't working, like it was no problem. Instead of treating it like a four-way stop, they were treating it like a green. And that can be deadly for people who, who are going the other way. So, Paul, certainly appreciate that. You notice, too, where Paul is, it's sunny. And behind tropical systems, quite often, you get that northwesterly flow coming in. And Paul's been talking about how cool it is there, relatively, of course. And here's New Orleans. Beautiful day. This is a visible satellite. So this is where you see the dark map. There's no clouds. And we use a dark map to really make those fine features stand out. And we can diagnose the atmosphere and get an idea what types of clouds we're dealing with. Some of those cumulus clouds right here over Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. And the now post-tropical storm Zeta doesn't really have much in the way of tropical characteristics at all. That's why it's now post, no longer tropical. But still packing a bit of a punch here. Looking a little bit closer at this, as we zoom in, there are still a few areas in here where some cumulus clouds are building. So more showers, more thunderstorms are possible today with this system. But the heaviest of the heavy rain, I think, at least for now, is really wrapping up and moving into Maryland, into Delaware right now, into New Jersey. But even that is more of the moderate rainfall. Would not rule out when the thunderstorms start to fire, and if they start to fire, I would not rule out some pockets of some that flood watches in effect for where the rain is falling now and where it may be in the near future, with high wind warnings still going. Here's that severe thunderstorm threat from South Carolina to North Carolina and Virginia. And then what's next for this? It's heading offshore and possible impacts to the northeast. Let's go to storm specialist Carl Parker in the lab with a closer look at that. Carl.
Yeah, we're seeing some interaction with a much larger system that is now in the middle of the country, and that is the one that is bringing that cooler weather to New Orleans right now. It's actually pretty chilly at this time of the year when you've got these cold air masses coming down and you've got a contrast between cold and very warm tropical air. Well, that creates a lot of wind in the atmosphere, and that very strong wind was running up along that contrast, and that is what drove this thing so rapidly off to the northeast, now moving at more than 50 miles per hour. So, you know, between these two systems, there's a boundary here that's draped across the mid-Atlantic region. We're seeing some moisture forced up and over that, so a lot of rain in the northeast. But then the second system is going to come in as well, and that's going to keep things pretty wet through most of the northeast. And in fact, we're actually going to get some colder air filtering in tomorrow, and that'll bring some snow to New England and parts of New York State as well. Right now, the heavier rain is across the Delmarva, just getting ready to move out of D.C. We're going to get a break from the wet weather through the next several hours here, but then the rain is going to be developing tonight as system number 2 comes through. And then farther north, very wet day today. It's mostly light rain, but New York as well as Boston, plenty of wet weather, and we're seeing that back and across into the lakes as well. This, by the way, this area of brighter color right there, that is not heavy rain. That is what we call bright banding. That's an area of melting snow that shows up. It has a higher reflectivity for the radar. So looking at the forecast going forward, there is what is left of Zeta right there. You see the low pressure center, those concentric circles. That moves out. Again, we get a little bit of a break, particularly in the mid-Atlantic region, but then system number 2 comes in right in there. And so more rain develops across most of these areas into tonight and into tomorrow. And then as some colder air begins to filter in from the north, we expect to see more of that changing over to snow right around the northern Pennsylvania into New York State and New England. And it's not going to be a whole lot of snow, and generally the accumulations are going to be north and west of 95. But one thing that's good about all this wet weather that we're seeing next couple of days, it's been pretty dry in the Northeast, so it's something we certainly can use here. Here, by the way, are the forecast amounts for snow, and the heaviest amounts are going to be at higher elevations, primarily in the Catskills, as well as in the Green Mountains of Vermont. And looking at the larger picture, we see some heavier rainfall amounts right along the East Coast there, but for the most part, it is going to be lighter rain. Not real pretty weather, but that will improve dramatically as we go into the weekend. Lots of sunshine ahead this weekend. Let's get back out to Paul Goodloe now and reporting on what's going on there in New Orleans. And Paul, again, some silver lining here. You've got that much cooler weather coming in, so for all the people without power, at least it's not too uncomfortable.
It is cooler and drier, little breeze going on here. The temperatures in the sun feel warm, maybe around 75 or so, but in the shade where temperature is measured, we won't get out of the mid-60s today with a much lower dew point. But I want to show you this video of what happened during the eye of Hurricane Zeta as it came over New Orleans here. And we just talked to a local resident who said the same thing. The sky, it was just ominous. You had the gray and the wind coming through the eye wall. Then the eye came through. You saw yellows and pinks and purples here. A gorgeous view right after immense destruction of Hurricane Zeta.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
New video into the Weather Channel right now showing more of the trees snapped and down in Charlotte, North Carolina. That's right, from what was Tropical Storm Zeta, and 4 states away, or 5 depending on how you count. It was a hurricane, Hurricane Zeta, just yesterday, and now it is working offshore. It has worked through North Carolina, Virginia, and Maryland, and the Delmarva at the moment. A fast-moving storm packing a powerful punch was and remains Zeta. 50-mile-per-hour system, post-tropical storm that we're dealing with right now across Virginia and Maryland in the D.C. area, with winds still being reported close to 40 miles an hour, gusting to 36 in Richmond, Virginia. Norfolk gusting closer to 40 at 39. Hatteras, the Outer Banks there, 37, and in Greenville, 20 down in some areas here in North Carolina, out of the 400s. Alabama still in the 400,000 customer range, 465,000 customers in Louisiana, where the hurricane made landfall. But moving through Georgia overnight, early morning, and there's more power outages here in Georgia by about 200,000 than there are 3 states away where landfall happened, and where we find meteorologist Paul Goodloe, who joins us from what is now a sunny New Orleans, Louisiana, but not the case yesterday. We were watching, Paul, while you were riding out this storm, making a direct hit on the Big Easy.
Yeah, it's amazing. We have, with all the impacts we've had with tropical systems, even Katrina, that wasn't a direct hit here in New Orleans. That center of Katrina was in Mississippi, not here in New Orleans. Of course, we had the flooding disaster associated with Katrina, but Last night was the first time in more than 30 years that a center of a hurricane came over the city of New Orleans. And many people kind of used Katrina as that benchmark. But before Katrina, there were other hurricanes. I think now Zeta could be a new benchmark. Didn't cause as much flooding at all as Katrina did. That's a whole different scale there. But with the wind damage, a Category 2 hurricane coming on through there, 80, 90, 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts did some damage. Take a look down the street here. We're in the Irish Channel neighborhood here, pretty close to the Lower Garden District. Lots of trees. That's a magnolia tree that is down. We have another camera on the other side of this tree, and that tree was right in front of a church that fell down and snapped that power pole there, basically blocking this road. And apparently there was another magnolia tree that fell about 30 plus years ago, most likely from the last time we had a center of a hurricane coming on through here. So, you know, New Orleans is definitely vulnerable, being under below sea level and having a huge flood risk with Lake Pontchartrain and Mississippi kind of bordering the city. That's always a concern. Even general summer thunderstorms can cause flooding in this city. But the winds, Chris, is perhaps a new benchmark has been set here in terms of damage. People, talking tens of thousands of people still without power right now. And as you mentioned earlier, at least you don't need air conditioning. It's very comfortable. Temperatures in the 60s, and will stay in the 60s even tomorrow, and no rain in the near future. In fact, this Halloween weekend looking quite comfortable here in the Big Easy. Chris?
Looking at the bright side of things, meteorologist Paul Goodlow, thanks so much. And that's something you might not think about, is when you see scenes like this in the tropics, you might think that, yeah, it's got to be cold, but no, tropical systems happen where it's warm and humid. So when they come through and you don't have power, that AC is so important, but oftentimes scenes like this will leave you without power, without electricity, without air conditioning, and without the power to keep your food cold and safe. So these were the scenes here in Louisiana, and scenes maybe minus the rain playing out similar to that in areas all the way through the southeast and now into the mid-Atlantic with this system. Power outages here, impressive. Across the United States, close to 3 million. And in the south, Georgia has the most. Next, Louisiana, where Zeta actually made landfall. Now let's go back to the lab with storm specialist Carl Parker with look at what he's looking at right now. Carl?
Well, a lot of that moisture from the system has gone up into the northeast, made for a very wet day today. You can see that really clearly looking at the water vapor imagery. And you also notice the upper low that's off to the west. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch for the northeast. Really soggy day today. We've got a little bit of a break in between these two systems, particularly in the mid-Atlantic region. You notice some of that heavier rain now beginning to move on in the Baltimore and D.C. area, still covering the Delmarva and a lot of New Jersey as well. And then that little bit of a dry coming up through south central PA, lower Susquehanna Valley. Now, that'll continue to be the case of the next several hours as that moves out, but we expect to see a new round coming in late tonight and through the day in New York State as well as northern parts of New England. We're going to have much more on Zeta coming up in just a few minutes.
As we've seen time and time again, including this time, Zeta, not just a coastal problem, as the winds pushed well inland, states away from where it made landfall as a hurricane. It brought down trees and power lines, and in turn, knocking out power to millions of customers from Alabama to Atlanta and beyond. But it's in Atlanta where we find the Weather Channel's Dave Malkoff with the look at some of the damage there. Dave.
Yeah, it's amazing to think how Zeta was able to keep its power as it pushed on shore in Louisiana and still go through many states 410 miles away from the landfall in Louisiana. We are standing here in Atlanta, and look at this tree down, cutting off this roadway. This is just one of maybe hundreds that we have seen this morning. Look at this root structure here. You can see it took a lot of wind to snap that off and push this down onto the roadway. But think of this. This didn't come down on a power line, but several of the trees around here did. In fact, there were up to 1 million customers without power in the state of Georgia, 410 miles away from landfall. So it's going to take a and put everybody back online, possibly here in Georgia, not in Louisiana, but in Georgia. They may even need some help from outside states with those linemen coming in and putting power back because of this storm that pushed through several states. I'm Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel. Back to you.
And as Dave mentioned, that started in Louisiana, and that's where meteorologist Paul Goodloe is joining us from now. And Paul, if people haven't been to South Louisiana, it's a beautiful part of the country. Water is everywhere in terms of lakes and rivers. And is there anything to you that stands out since you've been there and been covering this particular hurricane?
The thing that kind of stood out was people were definitely concerned about the water more so than the wind. And part of that is the initial forecast was a Cat 1 at landfall, and ideally it would be weakening as it came over New Orleans or pretty close to New Orleans, but it was a Cat 2 at landfall, a strong Cat 2. It was 1 mile per hour away from being a Cat 3, a major hurricane, and that center came right over New Orleans. But you speak of water, Chris, and a big concern on the north side of town. That border is the southern edge of Lake Pontchartrain. This is our camera from yesterday showing the huge wave action because we had strong east winds. As the center approached, the winds changed direction and started sloshing that water up and over that little area there on Lakeshore Drive and into even parts of the picnic areas, which are still underwater this morning. My producer went out there to check that out. By the way, that camera was on the New Canal Lighthouse. That lighthouse had some damage as well. So that's some of the water. This city is surrounded on basically all sides by either the lake or the Mississippi River here. So people were always concerned. Even a general summer thunderstorm can cause flooding in this city because we're below sea level and we have to pump that water out. But that's always a concern. But with Zeta and its strong winds, people were kind of surprised to see how much damage was done and how strong the winds got last night. And it might be a couple of days before everyone has power restored to this city.
Yeah, Paul, it ended up being a little bit stronger than had been originally thought. Thank you so much. And here's a northeast 53 miles per hour as a post-tropical system, so it has just taken off like a rocket ever since making landfall out ahead of this very powerful jet stream. You expect to see more of this kind of thing at this time of the year, and that's why it was able to maintain so much of its intensity as it went up through the southeast and into the mid-Atlantic region. So right now we're still seeing some gusty wind in some areas, still gusting to 44 miles per hour in Elizabeth City. That's going to gradually be on the wane this afternoon. Winds also gusting to 38 now in Norfolk. So we expect to see wind gusts over 40 miles per hour. Still wind advisories in effect in North Carolina and in Virginia. There you see the forecast for wind gusts going through the rest of the afternoon. This is gradually going to be waning from west to east. Still some pretty strong wind late this afternoon around Tidewater, Virginia and the southern Delmarva, and then it does improve pretty dramatically, we think, by this evening, but still a little gusty there. And we'll also watch some of that wind move up and along the northeast coast, and so some gusty wind for New England tonight.
We're all right here in downtown New Orleans here on Canal Street. So these winds will only continue to howl here. You can see some of these huge palm trees. They're being just flopped around with these strong winds. And I was trying to walk up here against the wind, nearly impossible. The winds will only get stronger. Yeah, and it's only getting stronger as well. It's difficult to even breathe out here, Mike. I know you've been in an eye wall or two, and that's the thing. Even the National Hurricane Center is warning people here in New Orleans when the wind starts to die down, and it will over the next hour or so, do not go outside because that is the eye. So it's going to be an ongoing... now as we still have this strong winds. And I just imagine how this wind is in some of the older neighborhoods here in New Orleans. Again, I'm on Canal Street. This street is huge. There are a lot of narrow streets in these beautiful neighborhoods where it's probably howling. The accelerate even stronger, bringing down parts of trees and power lines as well. Not to mention, like this sign has been knocked over as well. That's why I'm trying to stay upwind of this. And just dealing with a little shelter by this land post. But we're now in that northern eye wall of Hurricane Zeta making landfall here. It's the first time in years that we've had landfall here in New Orleans. And this, the wind, is going to be the biggest damage maker here. Of course, we're concerned about flooding. But it's moving so fast, the rain won't be.
5 o'clock Central Time, and the storm ended up being a little bit stronger than what had been forecast. Well, why was that? When you think about the conceptual model of a tropical cyclone, the way that it works is that you have warm and humid air coming in the low levels of the storm, and then it rises up through the middle of the storm, and then it comes out at the top. So that is the engine. That's the heat engine, where you have warm and humid air coming in, feeding that engine, rises up, and then goes out at the top. And so what happens when you've got very strong winds nearby is it can either be helpful or harmful to the circulation. If the very strong winds get right over top of the circulation, and it was thought that that wind shear might do that, it actually starts to disrupt the circulation. But in fact, what ended up happening was the stronger wind was nearby, and it actually helped to aid that outflow a little bit. So that model, that in, up, and out model, was actually enhanced by the presence of that very strong wind nearby. I think that's at least part of why it ended up being a little bit stronger. We saw here in some areas, you're talking about winds well over 100 miles per hour in gusts. Bay St. Louis gusting to 104, Shell Beach gusting to 101 miles per hour, Biloxi gusting to 90, and Dauphin Island 91 miles per hour. So clearly that at the level of not only causing major tree and power line damage, but some structural damage as well. It's going to be a while, big long cleanup there for many parts of Louisiana and Mississippi in particular. And the surge forecast was an excellent forecast from the National Hurricane Center, and we were talking about a life-threatening level of surge, and we did unfortunately hear that there was someone who went down to watch the storm and got caught in that surge. When you're talking about a water level of 7 to 8 feet above normally dry ground, and it's not just water that's not moving, it's got flow to it, it's got power, there's often wave action, and of course there's wind on top of that. That's an extraordinarily dangerous situation. Surge, the big killer when it comes to hurricanes, and you just do not want to be anywhere near the coast. And this storm surge flooding, by the way, in Bay St. Louis, in the top 5, number 3 for all-time surge values, but nowhere near what we saw with Katrina. Look at that, 24 to 28 feet estimated there. That was an absolutely devastating storm in terms of surge in Mississippi and, of course, in New Orleans. And what a year in Louisiana. 5 landfalls from tropical cyclones. We did have a direct impact from a tropical storm, Cristobal, in New Orleans, but the stronger windstorms were in western Louisiana up until this moment. And Chris, as Paul mentioned, the first time that we've had a direct landfall there in New Orleans from an eye wall in 30 years.
It is remarkable, and remarkable season it is. And this right here, some new video into the Weather Channel of a UPS cargo jet making a landing here at the airport in Charlotte, making a landing with some of the strong winds. As you can see here, the plane coming in, and we're going to watch it. Back wheels are down, and good to go. You have more new video coming in to the Weather Channel right now with some blue sky. Unfortunately, it's not all golden sunshine here. The damage has been done across parts of Louisiana. Power outages and remaining residual flooding as well. And this repeated over and over again. And this as the storm was coming on shore during the dark hours of the night in Gulfport, Mississippi. Tracking Zeta here on the Weather Channel, a 50-mile-per-hour post-tropical Zeta, no longer showing the characteristics. 24 hours ago, we were watching the beginning of the eye wall approach the Louisiana coastline and start to come on shore, and now look where it is. And look what's left of it. It is clipping along at 53 miles an hour, and the rain is quickly moving offshore. Can't rule out a few showers and thunderstorms, but in the path, in the wake of the path here, a lot of still blustery winds and a lot of power outages. Hundreds of thousands of power outages with the current wind speeds here. Winds gusting in the Carolinas to winds gusting to 23, and still in Atlanta, winds gusting to 26 miles an hour. High wind warnings still in effect across portions of North Carolina. Wind advisories, this lighter purple color, extending into parts of Maryland and even up to the southernmost point there in New Jersey. And the winds going forward. If you look at the forecast, 40 to 50 mile an hour winds, still a possibility over the next couple of hours. Even Newport News up maybe up to 60 miles an hour as this system continues to work offshore. Before the overnight hours, we see much calmer winds, but not calm, just calmer in relationship to what we're dealing with right now, because these still southerly winds could be blowing about 20 to 25 miles an hour. And again, still a possibility that there could be some thunderstorms today and a decreasing chance, but still a chance with this push of rain that is moving through parts of eastern Maryland and Delaware, New Jersey. The parts of Pennsylvania includes Philadelphia. So we're going to be watching still this storm work offshore, but still it's not done once it gets offshore, because there's still the possibility that it could have a little say in what happens in the Northeast. We'll get to that later, but first let's go to storm specialist Carl Parker, who's still, that's right, still eyeing the tropics. Hurricane season goes through November, we know, Carl.
Yes, it does, and I'm sure a lot of people want to spit nails at the thought of another tropical cyclone, but we do think that this one is not likely going to have an effect in the U.S. Hurricane Center watching this area that is now near the Lesser Antilles, and they're giving it a 60% chance of developing into a tropical cyclone. That's an umbrella term for tropical storm or hurricane, and it's not likely going to develop soon, but rather the tropical wave will continue to work west. That area just north of South America and west of the Lesser Antilles tends to be an area where there's not as much development because there's more wind shear. But then as it gets farther to the west into the Western Caribbean, that would be the spot where it would begin to develop. And in fact, we do think that there's likely going to be a pretty significant storm there. Some of the modeling indicating that. I'll show you that in a moment. So we're losing the light right now in the visible satellite imagery, but you see this tropical wave that is coming into the islands, into the Leeward and Windward Islands. So squally weather for those islands over the next 24 hours here. You also notice as there are some thunderstorms a little farther to the west, you can see how the tops of those storms are being blown off pretty quickly. That's the wind shear I'm talking about. That's why it's not going to be developing quickly here. Now, this is a look at what is called vorticity. So this is the spin in the low levels of the atmosphere at about 5,000 feet up. And this gives us a really good idea of where tropical cyclones are developing. So right now it doesn't look like a whole lot. It's sort of amorphous. It's a tropical wave. It'll continue to be that for the next couple of days. But then as we get more towards early next week, we start to see this thing really taking shape. You see the yellow and orange there. And so if it were to happen like that, that would be a hurricane. That would be a hurricane coming into Honduras and Nicaragua. And by the way, we have seen some incredibly serious storms at this time of the year in that part of the world. You go back to 1998, and Hurricane Mitch affected Honduras and Nicaragua for 2 days as an incredibly strong storm, just devastated many, many parts of those nations. The infrastructure was just wiped out, and that continued for years after that. Now, let's talk about climatology. And so you see the statistical peak of the season in the early part of September, and then it drops off pretty quickly. So statistically, we have 7% of the season left. But the question is this changing? Is this average area changing here? And the reason why we wonder about that is because there is so much warmth in the ocean. You see temperatures are are above average across just about the entire Atlantic basin. That's indicated by the yellow and the orange and the red there. And so if we continue to see very warm oceans, that could conceivably extend the boundaries of the tropical season and give us storms even later in the season. And we want to remind you that Comcast is making free Xfinity Wi-Fi hotspots available in the areas hit by storms. And to find one near you, go to xfinity.com/Wi-Fi. We'll have much more on Zeta coming up in just a few minutes.
From landfall, we're still in a path of destruction. I'm Dave Malkoff in Atlanta, Georgia. Look at what has happened here. These are power lines that have snapped as trees came down, blowing in the wind, rain pouring. It is not just this neighborhood. This is all of the big city of Atlanta throughout the state of Georgia. We'll have a report coming up.
Power out in Atlanta, power out in New Orleans. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodler here in New Orleans. See the trees down, power lines down here, neighborhoods without power, all because of our fifth name system making landfall just in the state of Louisiana. We'll have a live report on recovery coming up.
And as places like New Orleans come to terms with what Zeta has already done, communities, including Richmond, Virginia, now dealing with the wake of Zeta as well. The system has been bringing some flood threats into Virginia, also lots of wind, and the kind of wind that's been cutting power to, in some cases, more than 1 million customers at one time in Georgia alone. And this is charging now through the mid-Atlantic and eventually taking a course off the East Coast. That won't be the end of it. Boston, you're one of the places that needs to closely watch what will happen next. Zeta's energy expected to help create a wet and even at times wintry weekend in parts of the Northeast. And right now, this system is losing a little bit of its oomph, a little bit of its gusto, but still packing a bit of a punch with 50-mile-per-hour winds associated with it. The overall system is moving to the east-northeast at 53 miles an hour. No longer, again, has those tropical characteristics, but still making for a stormy day. Some sunshine behind it, but blustery and windy as well. High wind warnings, wind advisories remain in effect. Still plenty of power outages, more than 2.5 million customers without power across the United States, with the huge majority of those associated with Zeta, and Zeta making landfall through here. But the state with the most power outages, Georgia, is over here, 3 states away. So we know that Atlanta hit hard by Zeta, happening in the early morning pre-dawn hours this morning. Reports of hundreds of trees down, some slamming into homes, others blocking roads. Our Dave Malkoff has seen them both and has more now on the situation in Atlanta.
Yeah, it's amazing to think we are 410 miles from landfall in Louisiana, but the storm was able to keep its strength. Even tropical storm force winds here in Atlanta. Look what it did in this one neighborhood here, snapping those power lines like they were nothing. The trees just coming down, blowing in the wind, knocking out power to hundreds in this neighborhood. And this is just one example of dozens and dozens of neighborhoods that we have personally seen this morning as we have been driving around assessing the damage. One of the worst things that we've seen was something that looked very, very dangerous. Let me take you about 10 miles from here, where you can see that a tree was down in the road, covered in vines. It was the dead of night, so there was no lights at all on this roadway. It was very slick with the water and also the leaves and the pine needles that were on the road. This gentleman was in his vehicle and slammed right into that tree. He believes he totaled his car. He is okay. His airbags didn't even go off, but he was very shooken up by this event. He didn't even see that tree in front of him. There have been a lot of these incidents happening. We even saw a tree into a house northwest of here. There was a tree into a trailer. There was a death in northern Georgia. So it's a path of destruction that started in the Gulf of Mexico, but pushed all the way through here because the storm was moving so fast that it was able to keep its strength as it pushed through state by state, causing destruction wherever it went. In Atlanta, Georgia, I'm Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel.
All right, thank you so much, Dave. And of course, Atlanta dealing with so many power outages, which may not be restored for a couple of days in some cases. And that's the story across several states in the Southeast. But this storm making landfall first in Louisiana, and the first one to have a direct hit this season and quite some time in the beautiful and lovely city of New Orleans. That's where we find meteorologist Paul Goodloe, who joins us now live on a sunny yet relatively cool day there in New Orleans. Paul.
It is. In fact, last time we had a hurricane approach this area and make landfall, really, I guess it was 2002 with the Hurricane Isidore, which quickly weakened to a tropical storm moving into the city. So it's borderline whether that truly was the last hurricane that came across here. But the center of Zeta, still is a Category 2 hurricane, plowed across this city. You can see the wind damage. Some of the strongest winds with an eye wall came through here, brought down the tree, which also brought down this power pole here. And we showed you pictures earlier. We're going to show the video again of this tree was actually sitting in church property. We have the pastor of this church, Reverend Tilton, joining us here. Thanks for taking time. You're busy cleaning up. First of all, what's the status of the church? Any damage to the church from this tree falling?
No damage from the tree. It was interesting that the tree fell into the street. There were 3 cars that were looking like they were in its target zone, and it missed all of them, praise God. But it came up from the root. The winds were so strong, and I've gone through a couple of hurricanes here. It was pretty intense as we were going through that, no doubt.
And you're saying you have pictures from, a long time ago that showed that tree back in, 1915?
In 1915, that tree was a good-sized tree even then, and so we know that the tree is well over 100-plus years old. The church is built in 1856. I have trouble counting that far back at this point, but built in 1856 by German Presbyterians. Our congregation is kind of a Baptist congregation. I've been here for 32 years, and we've seen the complexion of the neighborhood change, but this has to go because right now we have a street blocked and folks can't pass through here. We have folks blocked in their driveways and all that as well.
So the tree that fell, there used to be a second tree next to it, but that fell years ago.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, just before Hurricane Katrina, we had a storm that come through here that knocked half of that tree off. We had to later take it down, but this tree, they were both majestic magnolias. Everybody remarked about them. As a matter of fact, they were so big until sometimes you couldn't see the buildings behind them until we trimmed them back.
So what's the plan for the church? You're going to go online if you don't get power back come this weekend?
Well, we've been online, and we actually were online before the storm came, before the pandemic came. But we've decided that we're going to continue online with folks, and as things, our city has done really well in getting the pandemic and the numbers down. We have a low number of deaths, a low number of people who are hospitalized, and the cases have dropped down. We give great credit to our Mayor Cantrell for that.
So this is the 7th threat you had so far this hurricane season. Do you think you and your parishioners were they taking things for granted when they had yet another threat from the tropics?
I hope they weren't, because it was always my suggestions and recommendations and instructions to folks: don't take anything for granted. As somebody said not long ago, we've missed a lot. It may be our turn. So always watching to make sure that you're always on guard, because hurricanes can be very tricky. As we've seen several of them just poofed out. When you got to the mouth of the river, some folks said that we prayed enough that they stopped, but others, it didn't happen that way. So you always have to be on guard and be ready, have your lights and your plan for what's going to happen if, in fact, you're without lights for days, which will be the case as we are today.
And, Reverend, what's your plan? I know you don't live too far away, and you've lost power as well.
Yes, fortunately, before hurricane season started, interestingly enough, I purchased a generator for the church, and I purchased one for my house. And so we're able to keep the refrigerator and freezer from going out, and also able to watch the news and some things that are going on, but we're not able to watch the Weather Channel just yet until cable comes back, and we're looking forward to it.
Let's work on that. But also, if people want to perhaps tune in online to your church, what's the name of your church? How can they see your services online?
We're the Irish Channel Christian Fellowship, and if they go to Facebook, You can go to Facebook at ICCF-NOLA. ICCF-NOLA. That's Irish Channel Christian Fellowship New Orleans. Or they can go to our website, www.iccfnola.com.
All right, Pastor Tilton, thank you so much for your time, and best wishes on the recovery, and hopefully this neighborhood will get their power back up. As Reverend Tilton mentioned, this is the Irish Channel neighborhood here in New Orleans. There's so many just distinct neighborhoods. It's such a great city to even visit, and hopefully we'll get this pandemic back, as this city really relies on the tourism. These are the neighborhoods. This is where people live, but people are notoriously famous for their visits to Bourbon Street and other areas here in New Orleans. But just go through some of these neighborhoods. It's a kind of a walk back in time. There's so much rich history here, Chris, and part of that is the small, narrow streets and the beautiful trees. There's so much character here, which when you have Cat 2 winds come through, you can see why there's so much power out, because there's so many trees in these beautiful neighborhoods.
Absolutely bursting with character. You're right about that, Paul. Also, I noticed the pastor, even though he's wearing sunglasses, I think I could see his eyes twinkling when he mentioned they have a generator. The importance of having a generator, Paul, right? Once you've lost power.
That's a game changer right there.
It really is. And you don't appreciate power as much as when you don't have it. And across parts of the Southeast, several states with hundreds of thousands of customers without power, including Georgia. A state that's, when you talk about number of people, or at least customers, hardest hit with this one. At one point across the state, about 1 million outages. That number is down. We want to get an update now from Allison Gregory with Georgia Power, and kind enough to join us again on the phone. And we see now down below 600,000. Those are our latest numbers here across the state of Georgia. Fulton County, where Atlanta is, particularly hard hit. Can you give us an update since the last time, Allison, we spoke with you 2 hours ago?
Absolutely. Like you said, we had about 610,000 customers out this morning at our peak after the storm. As of right now, around 4 o'clock, we're at 346,000 customers out. So we've made great progress today. Like I said before, this was a hard-hitting storm with lots of trees falling due to the soil being so saturated. So we knew this was going to happen. Damage assessment teams are out there right now. They're seeing what equipment's needed, how many poles, how many lines need to be replaced, and that's when our restoration teams are coming in to get people's power back on.
And a lot of people, the big question, of course, is when. When is the power going to be restored? And if you go to the website, you look at the estimated restoration time, and the answer may be assessing the situation. So is there an idea of when we will know when the estimation could come?
All right, so right now we don't have any estimated restoration time because there's so much damage assessment that must be done just because so many trees fell. And when trees fall, so do power lines and wires. And our teams have to assess that first, and they have to be very careful for their safety and for customer safety once they go in to start restoring power. So yeah, customers are probably assessing the situation right now, and they will likely start seeing damage assessment teams in their neighborhood if they haven't already. This was a big storm. We expect it to take some time, maybe through tomorrow and the weekend, to restore power, but we're working as quickly and safely as we can.
Are damage assessment teams different than those that are actually going to restore the power?
They are. So damage assessment teams usually go out first after a hurricane like this. They go out in their trucks. They've been out since early this morning, and they go area by area, and they look at what has been damaged, how many lines are down, how many poles are down, are they broken, can they be fixed? And then they start assigning line crew teams that will then go out in their bucket trucks, and they'll repair the lines, they'll change out the poles, and do whatever needs to be done.
Does it help when customers call in to report an outage?
On a usual day, yes, we very much encourage our customers to go to georgiapower.com and report an outage. However, we have crews working 24/7 right now in the field at our corporate headquarters, storms teams, distribution teams, transmission teams, all on deck right now. And we are up to date on where the latest outages are, where we're expecting the most damage. But we appreciate customers if they want to continue to report that damage as well.
When you explain the power outage restoration process to people, friends or family, what are they most interested or surprised to learn?
I think the thing most people are surprised to learn is that there is a damage assessment team that has to go out first, that we really can't just send our line crews out. Our line crews actually can't go up in bucket trucks to begin restoring power until wind gusts fall below 30 miles per hour. Wind gusts got very high here this morning during that storm, so our crews could not go out yet for their safety and for customer safety. So we send our damage assessment teams out first. They see what kind of damage we're working with. We're working with quite a bit of tree falling here and standing water, so we're working through that, getting that cleared out first, and then those line crews are going to come in. So it's very interesting for people to hear that that's what you do first.
And people, of course, wanting to know when, and the short answer, just to reiterate, is when Georgia Power customers can expect power. Would it be safe to say hours to days?
As of right now, yes, we don't have any estimated restoration times officially, so it could be a few hours, it could be a few days. We hope to have everyone restored by the weekend or through the weekend. Right now, we're just asking our customers to be patient. We really appreciate it. We know this is a really difficult time to have your power out during a pandemic when so many people are already at home working and doing school. So we really appreciate our customers' patience. We're working as quickly and safely as possible. We're working 24/7. We've tapped into our mutual assistance network to bring in other utilities to help us out, and that will be happening as well. We also have our Georgia Power crews from around the state that have come in to help, as well as some of our contractors.
Allison Gregory with Georgia Power. We certainly do appreciate your time and appreciate all the hard work that the crews do working those long hours to try to get the power back on for everybody affected by Hurricane, then Tropical Storm Zeta.
Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we. Get the information you need to stay safe every day, right here on the Weather Channel.
And right here on the Weather Channel, some new video coming in, and this a boat not where it's supposed to be. Close, but not quite. Here, unfortunately, this is what can happen with boats remaining in place in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi when a hurricane arrives. Tattered sailboat here, and then this boat sunk. Looks like it's down probably on the seafloor there as far as the lines will take it, let it go down in the water, flipped over. Sometimes it's hard to make sense of what you see after a storm, and in this case, I see in the bow of the sailboat pointed down and the stern up of this one as well. So a couple of areas here, the mooring lines may have snapped, or the docking lines may have snapped or given way on some parts, and pushing stuff into places that's hard to comprehend unless you know what happened. And of course, we know what happened was Hurricane Category 2, higher end Category 2, Hurricane Zeta. Continue to track Zeta right now on the Weather Channel as it is now post-tropical, no longer with the tropical characteristics, but it is moving, eventually it will be moving offshore. It's getting closer to it. Still some strong winds, though, gusting in that 30 to 40 mile an hour range in areas here of North Carolina, Virginia, into the Delmarva as well. High wind warnings and wind advisories. As a result, this is what we have, power outages, and it is 2.5 million across the United States. Georgia now under 600,000 customers, but Georgia has the most. Louisiana, second most, and Louisiana is where this made landfall. Here's Mississippi, Alabama, and then Georgia with Atlanta up here. With, of course, so many people and so many trees, the combination of which means you're going to have a lot of utility customers and a lot of customers that now do not have power. Similar story, of course, no power, but a nice looking day where meteorologist Paul Goodlow is right now, where he rode out the storm in New Orleans. Paul.
Hey, Chris, I mean, you've been through hurricanes as well, and you know the day after, It could be brutally hot and humid. I mean, today it's so unlike any other post-hurricane I've been through, perhaps maybe outside of Hurricane Sandy. Also kind of a late October storm here, but even here in New Orleans on the Gulf Coast, temperatures in the 60s here, very low humidity. That's a huge contrast to what happened when Zeta came through here. Before it even came through, it was air you can wear, dew points in the mid-upper 70s. It was a tropical air mass. This is not a tropical air mass. This is a fall air mass. And even temperatures well below average for this time of the year. But Zeta came through with quite the punch. It was, a Category 2 hurricane. And this scene here in the Irish Channel area in New Orleans is repeated all across the city. The winds brought down trees, bringing down power lines. You mentioned 600,000 customers in Atlanta without power. There are about 400,000 people who live here in New Orleans. Not all of them are without power, but again, the customers, it's a billing point. In terms of people, I usually do at least a 3-time multiplier on that. So I know for a while we had over 100,000 customers in this area in this city without power. So it was a good chunk of New Orleans without power. And if you're looking for any type of bright or cloud in this, think about what we have to deal with in TV. There's no cable, no power, no air conditioning, don't need that right now, but also no political commercials. So that could be the only upside of not having power here. But it is a major inconvenience because we all live in this digital age. We rely on our cell phones, our computers, our tablets to be connected, to even work from home, school from home as well. And all that is being interrupted because of what happened with Hurricane Zeta here. We are fortunate that the rain and the flooding wasn't as big as an issue and part of the recovery here, which we're certainly grateful for. But I think in terms of wind damage, Zeta is definitely kind of setting a new bar in terms of what type of damage we can see here in this beautiful city of New Orleans. It's so much character. And by the way, the tree behind me, we talked to the pastor of the church where the tree fell from. Over a 100-year-old tree. So this just tells you the age of this neighborhood and other neighborhoods here in New Orleans. It's a great city to visit once we get a handle on this COVID thing, because they do rely on tourism for a good chunk of the economy here. Chris?
All right, meteorologist Paul Goodlow, thanks so much. Yeah, great city. One of those cities, if it's not on your list and you haven't done it yet, just the architecture alone and the history, fantastic there in New Orleans. Power outage tracker, though, not so fantastic in some of the major metro areas. That's what you get. Here's the track of the storm, tropical storm, when it came through North Georgia. And so many trees. One of the beautiful things about Atlanta is just the sheer number of trees. If you get above, say, like the 5th or 6th floor, you look out, even in downtown, you see trees as far as the eye can see in a major metro area. But one of the great things about it can be its undoing in times like this. Let's go to storm specialist Carl Parker right now, because Carl, still getting a pretty big punch from this storm, and a lot of power outages remain.
Yeah, that's right. And also a pretty good bit of rain now coming up through the Northeast. And this is really just round one. It's going to be a wet period. There's going to be some snow as well. There you see all the rain that is now falling across the Northeast and beginning to move out of D.C. and Baltimore, but there's more on the way. And you see quite a bit of wet weather across New England. Another round of that coming in tonight and into tomorrow as well. We'll have much more coming up.
You're watching the Weather Channel, still tracking Zeta. Here's what we know at this hour. It has proven to be deadly. At least 5 people have died, 1 in Louisiana, 1 in Mississippi, and we've learned it's now 3 people have been killed in Georgia. The mayor of Mobile, Alabama, has imposed a curfew starting this evening at 6:30 until 6:30 tomorrow morning. City leaders are optimistic power will be restored by tomorrow, and the curfew will only last 1 night. In Louisiana, officials urge residents to report property damage to the website damage.la.gov. And we know, as we've seen time and time again, including this time, Zeta, hurricane, then tropical storm Zeta, not just a coastal problem. As the winds, very strong winds, pushed inland and very far inland, it brought down trees and power lines, knocking out power to millions of customers from Alabama to Atlanta and beyond. The Weather Channel's Dave Malkoff is in Atlanta with a look at the damage there. Dave?
Yeah, it's amazing to think how Zeta was able to keep its power as it pushed on shore in Louisiana and still go through many states 410 miles away from the landfall in Louisiana. We are standing here in Atlanta, and look at this tree down, cutting off this roadway. This is just one of maybe hundreds that we have seen this morning. Look at this root structure here. You can see it took a lot of wind to snap that off and push this down onto the roadway. But think of this. This didn't come down on a power line, but several of the trees around here did. In fact, there were up to 1 million customers without power in the state of Georgia, 410 miles away from landfall. So it's going to take a long time for those power crews to come back and put everybody back online. Possibly here in Georgia, not in Louisiana, but in Georgia, they may even need some help from outside states with those linemen coming in and putting power back because of this storm that pushed through several states. I'm Dave Malkoff, the Weather Channel. Back to you.
All right, thank you so much for that, Dave Malkoff, of course, reporting in Atlanta. And, of course, 3 states away, there's to the west, Alabama, and then Mississippi, and then Louisiana. And Louisiana is the location of New Orleans, and very close to where this storm came ashore and right in the path of Hurricane Zeta at the time. And meteorologist Paul Goodlow was right in the middle of it. Paul.
Yeah, and Chris, here across the south, we have a lot of notorious kind of trees here. You have live oaks, very sturdy oak trees, as well as the evergreen magnolia, known for their green waxy leaves. And that's behind me is a magnolia tree, over 100 years old, came crashing down. We have video of the front side, the other side of this tree here. It actually fell from the front of a church. Again, that church is well over 100 years, 170 years, I believe, give or take a couple, just doing some quick math here, all because of the winds with Hurricane Zeta. But it wasn't just this tree. We're talking all across the city. We're seeing trees down, oak trees, magnolia trees, you name it. We got damage. You can see the aerial view from this drone shot showing you this beautiful city dealing with trees down, which, just like Dave talked about there in Atlanta, bringing down power lines too. So we have actually a decent amount of wind damage across this city, mainly because this was a Category 2 hurricane. Many people were surprised that it did strengthen to that as it made landfall and kind of let their guard down in terms of the potential for wind damage. We are always on edge in New Orleans with hurricanes and tropical storms in terms of flooding. We know the damage and the moisture these things can bring across the area. Yeah, we had some flooding, some wind and storm surge across even Lake Pontchartrain, but the big issue here and across other neighborhoods, we're in the Irish Channel area, is the wind and the damage and the trees down and power down. And in this digital age, we desperately need power. A few people have generators on their homes, have portable generators as well, but you always got to remember, we don't want the secondary deaths from people running generators indoors. You got to make sure they're always outdoors. And even power lines. This just doesn't go for here in Louisiana, New Orleans. It goes all across the path of Zeta. See a down power line, treat it as live. Someone died in this city because they encountered and only here in New Orleans, but field still going on with what's left of Hurricane Zeta. We're back after this.
The worst of what Hurricane Zeta has to offer is just about to come through Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. We're getting very close to the eastern eye wall. It's less than 20 miles away, so we're feeling the brunt of the storm. All of the power in Bay St. Louis has just gone out. The storm surge is continuing to bring in the water from the marina, from the bay, into the marina rather, and covering up all of the docks. Conditions and we know it's only going to get worse as that eye wall gets closer and closer here to us in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. We know we're going to feel those hurricane force winds over 75 miles per hour, and this is not the time to be out. We are going to be going to our safe place here in Bay St. Louis as Zeta is certainly getting closer and closer. In Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, Justin Michaels, the Weather Channel.
And that was Justin yesterday evening in Bay St. Louis, as he mentioned, during what at the time was Hurricane Zeta. Now he takes us back and shows us what it looks like today.
Bay St. Louis, Mississippi is cleaning up after Category 2 Hurricane Zeta.
It was like a train constantly rolling by the house the whole time, trees snapping.
The storm took out power, took down trees, and toppled tombstones.
My wife was wondering if it was a tornado because it was just a steady roar, you know, so it was out here.
An official wind gust was clocked in Bay St. Louis at 104 miles per hour. The 7 to 11-foot storm surge forecast was right on the money. Municipal surge gauges hit the 11-foot mark.
And I wasn't expecting 75-pound pots to be thrown over. I wasn't expecting the gutter to be ripped off the front. And I certainly wasn't expecting big limbs to come off of my magnificent oak.
Nikki Moon has seen a lot in Bay St. Louis, including Hurricane Katrina. During that storm, she held onto a tree for dear life.
I don't think anybody expected it to be really a 2. We were thinking it'd be a 1, and a 1 is like not much for us. But a 2 is pretty hefty.
The municipal marina took the brunt of the storm. Boats broke their moorings. They sunk, flipped, and even went vertical with their bows stuck in the mud. Very visible evidence of how powerful Zeta was on the Mississippi coast.
And one of the questions is, why did it get a little stronger right as it was coming on shore? Well, part of the answer may be the presence of this very strong system and very strong wind aloft just off to the northwest. If you consider the conceptual model of a tropical cyclone, you have warm and humid air that comes into the system, rises up through those thunderstorm towers, and then is evacuated at the top. And so if you've got very strong wind nearby, that assists with that evacuation process and can actually make the storm more efficient and can lead to intensification. So that may have been at least a part of what happened yesterday. And wow, did we see some very strong wind. Bay St. Louis gusting to 104 miles per hour, Shell Beach 101, Laplace gusting to 100. So a really strong hit there in southeast Louisiana and southern Mississippi. Biloxi gusting to 90 miles per hour and 71 miles per hour, well off to the east of where that center was coming on shore. Fantastic forecast for storm surge from the National Hurricane Center. You see some of the values there, 7 to 8 feet. There was unfortunately a drowning. Someone apparently went down to the coast to see the storm. And, you know, when you're talking about a water level of 7 to 8 feet above normally dry ground with flow to it, with perhaps wave action on top of it, that is such a life-threatening situation. And that is the big killer in hurricanes, storm surge flooding. And you can see these are really exceptional values. And as a matter of fact, the third highest storm surge that we have seen in Bay St. Louis. Of course, we're not going to see that number one value, number one record toppled anytime soon. That was 24 to 28 feet of surge caused by Hurricane Katrina, a very large storm that was for a time a Category 5 in the Gulf of Mexico. What a year it has been in Louisiana. 5 landfalls from tropical cyclones. We had a direct impact from Cristobal, which was a tropical storm in New Orleans, but the stronger storms affecting initially just the western part of the state near Lake Charles, of course, Laura, and then Delta after that. But this was a Category 2 as it came up and into New Orleans, and the first time that we've seen an eye wall affecting New Orleans in 30 years. Chris, over to you.
And still dealing with the power outages from Zeta, hurricane, then tropical storm Zeta, and still wind alerts in effect because of what is now post-tropical cyclone Zeta that is potentially creating more power outages right now before it works its way offshore. But just looking at this, Georgia now under 600,000 customers without power, and that is the highest number of customers without power for the southern states. Louisiana and Alabama, well over 400,000, and North Carolina, more than 300,000. And then because of the ice, Oklahoma